The moment my 8-year-old grandson hugged me beside my husband's casket, I thought he simply needed comfort. Instead, I felt something small slide into my coat pocket. Without looking up, Ethan whispered, "Grandpa said only you should have this after everyone started leaving." Before I could ask what he meant, Rebecca hurried over, pulled him away, and shot me a panicked look I had never seen before. Across the chapel, my son Michael froze for just a second before forcing another smile for the mourners. As I slipped my hand into my pocket and felt the edge of a tiny flash drive, I realized Daniel hadn't left me with memories alone. He had left me the truth. If you've ever wondered how well we really know the people we love, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Would you have opened that flash drive immediately or waited until you were alone? Share your answer in the comments below. And if you enjoy emotional family dramas filled with suspense, unexpected twists, and unforgettable endings, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support truly means the world to me. The house had never sounded so loud, not because anyone was speaking, but because no one was. When I unlocked the front door after Daniel's funeral, the familiar click echoed through the hallway like it belonged to someone else's home. For 43 years, Daniel had always been the first to greet me whenever one of us came through that door. Sometimes he would call out from the kitchen asking what I wanted for dinner before I'd even taken off my coat. Other times, he'd simply smile over the top of whatever newspaper or financial report he happened to be reading. This time there was nothing, only silence. I stood in the foyer for several seconds, unable to make myself move. The scent of the lilies people had sent after his passing, mixed with the faint smell of coffee lingering from the pot Michael had brewed that morning before everyone left for the church. Everything looked exactly the same, yet nothing felt familiar anymore. My hand instinctively slipped into the pocket of my black funeral coat. The flash drive. It was still there, tiny, cold, unexpectedly heavy for something so small. I wrapped my fingers around it without taking it out, replaying Ethan's whisper in my mind. "Grandpa said only you should have this after everyone started leaving." Daniel had always adored Ethan. The two of them spent hours building model airplanes, solving crossword puzzles, and inventing little treasure hunts around the backyard. Ethan believed every game Grandpa created had secret rules only the two of them understood. At the time, I'd thought it was simply their special bond. Now I wasn't so sure. I carried my purse into the living room and sat in Daniel's favorite leather chair instead of my own. His reading glasses still rested on the side table beside a half-finished mystery novel. A yellow bookmark peeked out near the middle. He would never finish it. The realization struck me with fresh force. Tears blurred my vision. For several minutes I simply cried. Not the restrained tears I'd allowed myself during the funeral, while greeting relatives and accepting condolences. These were different. These were the tears that came when there was no one left to be strong for. Eventually, I wiped my face with a tissue and looked around the room. Daniel's cardigan still hung over the back of the couch. His slippers remained beside the fireplace. His coffee mug sat in the kitchen sink exactly where he'd left it before the ambulance took him to the hospital 12 days earlier. Every object reminded me that life had continued moving while mine had stopped. I walked into the kitchen and made myself a cup of tea, more out of habit than desire. As the kettle warmed, my thoughts drifted back over the last month of Daniel's life. There had been moments that hadn't made sense then. Moments I had dismissed because I believed stress and illness explained everything. Now those memories returned with startling clarity. One evening, Daniel had asked me if we could talk privately after dinner. Before he could begin, Michael walked into the kitchen carrying several folders. "Dad, I need your signature on a couple of insurance forms." Daniel's shoulders had dropped almost imperceptibly. "We'll talk later," he'd told me. We never did. Another afternoon, I found Daniel sitting alone on the back porch. He stared out toward the maple tree Ethan loved climbing. When I asked what he was thinking about, he smiled sadly. "Scarlett, if something ever doesn't feel right?" He stopped speaking. At that exact moment, Rebecca opened the sliding door. "There you are," she said brightly. "Michael's looking everywhere for you." Daniel simply nodded and stood. The conversation ended before it truly began. There had been more interruptions, far too many. At the time, I thought they were coincidences. Now I wasn't certain. The tea had already gone cold before I realized I hadn't taken a single sip. Outside evening settled across the neighborhood. Porch lights flickered on one by one while distant lawn sprinklers hissed softly across neighboring yards. Normally, Daniel and I would have been sitting together on the porch swing. Instead, I found myself staring at the flash drive resting on the kitchen table. What if it contained nothing important? What if Ethan had misunderstood? What if Daniel had simply stored family photographs on it? Then another thought followed immediately. What if he hadn't? My laptop sat in the small study at the end of the hallway. Daniel and I had shared the room for years. One side contained my shelves of books from my teaching days. The other side held his impeccably organized filing cabinets and financial records. His desk was still perfectly neat, every pen aligned, every folder stacked. Daniel had always believed that an organized desk reflected an organized mind. I sat down in front of the laptop. My hands trembled as I pressed the power button. The screen slowly illuminated the dark room. While the computer loaded, I found myself listening for Daniel's footsteps. Old habits refused to disappear easily. For one foolish second, I almost expected him to walk in carrying 2 mugs of coffee. Instead, there was only silence. When the desktop finally appeared, I held the flash drive between my fingers. It looked ordinary. Plain black plastic, no label, no markings. Nothing that suggested it carried anything unusual. I inserted it into the USB port. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then a folder appeared. Its title surprised me. For Scarlett only. My heart began pounding. I clicked. Inside were dozens of neatly organized folders. Each one carried a date. The earliest was nearly 9 months old. There were videos, audio recordings, scanned documents, photographs, spreadsheets. Every folder appeared meticulously arranged. Daniel had spent months building this archive. Months. Not days, not weeks, months. A chill spread through me. Whatever this was, it hadn't been created on impulse. It had been planned carefully. At the very top sat another file. Unlike the others, it had no date. Its title read, "Start Here." I hesitated. Every instinct told me that once I clicked that file, nothing in my life would ever be the same again. I closed my eyes. "Please," I whispered into the empty room. "I wish you were here to explain this yourself." There was no answer, only the soft hum of the computer. Finally, I clicked. A video opened. For a brief second, the screen remained black before Daniel appeared. He wasn't wearing a suit. He sat comfortably in his office wearing the blue sweater Ethan had given him for Christmas. He looked healthy, calm, much healthier than he had during his final weeks. He smiled gently into the camera, not the smile he used for family photographs, the quiet smile he reserved only for me. "Hello, Scarlett." My breath caught instantly. Hearing his voice again felt almost unbearable. He waited several seconds before continuing, as though giving me time to settle. "If you're watching this, then I wasn't able to tell you everything myself." He looked directly into the camera. "I know you're frightened already. I wish I could spare you what's coming next." He lowered his eyes briefly before looking back. "I've spent months documenting something I hoped I would never have to prove." He leaned forward. "There are things happening around us that don't make sense." Another pause. "I need you to promise me something." His expression grew more serious than I had ever seen. "No matter what you discover, don't tell anyone you've found these files until you've watched every single one." He took a slow breath. "Especially not Michael." The room suddenly felt ice cold. I stared at the screen, unable to blink. Daniel had never spoken our son's name with fear before. Never. Then he said the words that made every memory from the past 9 months fall into place. "I don't believe everyone around us is telling the truth anymore." The video faded to black. I sat frozen in the darkness of the study, my reflection staring back at me from the monitor. Outside, the grandfather clock in the hallway struck 9. For the first time since Daniel's funeral, I wasn't simply grieving my husband. I was beginning to fear what he had died trying to protect. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Daniel's voice again. "Especially not Michael." Those words refused to leave me alone. For 42 years, Daniel had been the calmest person I had ever known. He never jumped to conclusions. He never accused anyone without proof. Even when someone disappointed him, he always searched for an explanation before assigning blame. If he had recorded those words, he must have struggled for months before saying them. I replayed the video twice more. The second time I paid attention not to what Daniel said, but to what he didn't say. He never claimed Michael had stolen anything. He never called our son dishonest. He simply warned me not to reveal the existence of the files. That distinction mattered. Daniel wasn't asking me to condemn our son. He was asking me to be careful. When dawn finally crept through the study window, I realized I had spent the entire night sitting at his desk. The coffee in my mug had gone cold hours earlier. Birds chirped outside as if nothing had changed. I wished life would pause for just one day. Instead, the world continued moving without asking whether I was ready. My phone rang. Michael. I stared at his name for several seconds before answering. "Morning, Mom." His voice sounded tired. "You didn't answer my text last night. I wanted to make sure you were okay." "I'm all right." "You sure?" "Just couldn't sleep." I figured. There was a brief silence. I was thinking maybe Rebecca and I could come by today. "For what?" "To help organize Dad's office." My eyes drifted toward the laptop. The flash drive was still plugged into it. "I don't think I'm ready yet." "I understand." His answer came almost too quickly. "But there are insurance companies, banks, Social Security. There'll be paperwork. I know. Dad always kept everything organized. It'll be easier if we start now." Normally, I would have agreed immediately. Michael had always handled complicated paperwork better than I did. But now, Daniel's warning echoed again. "Don't tell anyone you found these files." "I appreciate it," I replied carefully, "but give me another day or two." Another pause. Longer this time. "Okay." His voice remained pleasant, but something about it felt rehearsed. "If you change your mind, just call." "I will." We hung up. For several moments, I simply stared at my phone. Maybe I was imagining things. Maybe grief was making me suspicious of everyone. Maybe Daniel had misunderstood something. I wanted desperately to believe that, more than anything, because the alternative meant our family was already breaking apart. I turned back toward the laptop. The next folder was labeled Month 1. Inside were several videos. I opened the earliest. Daniel appeared wearing a different shirt. He looked slightly amused. "I hope this ends up being unnecessary." He smiled weakly. "If you're seeing this, it means I decided to keep recording." He leaned back. 3 weeks ago, I noticed one of our investment statements was missing." He held up a folded envelope. I assumed I'd misplaced it. Then he lifted another document. "So I requested another copy." He placed both papers side by side. "They don't match." He slowly pointed to several highlighted numbers. "The account balances are different. The transaction history is different. Even the signatures authorizing transfers are different." I leaned closer to the screen. Daniel had scanned both documents. One showed a balance nearly $80,000 higher than the other. The transfer authorizations carried signatures that looked almost identical. Almost. Daniel zoomed in. "The first signature is mine." He clicked again. "The second," another enlargement appeared, "isn't." I felt my stomach tighten. Someone had forged Daniel's name. The realization made my hands go cold. Daniel continued speaking calmly. "I contacted the investment company. They confirmed the second statement exists in their system. So either someone altered our records, or someone altered theirs." He paused. "I don't know which possibility worries me more." The recording ended. I immediately opened the next. Daniel looked more serious this time. "I've started keeping copies of every document outside the house." He looked directly into the camera. "If anyone ever tells you records disappeared, they're lying." He opened a binder. "I've made duplicates." He smiled faintly. "Being an accountant for 40 years teaches you one valuable lesson. Paper tells the truth. People sometimes don't." The screen faded. I rubbed my temples. Nothing Daniel had shown so far actually implicated Michael, or Rebecca, or anyone specific. Only that someone had manipulated financial records. That could have happened anywhere, at the bank, at the investment firm, inside a computer system. I desperately wanted that explanation. Then I opened the third recording. Daniel looked exhausted. Dark circles surrounded his eyes. "I wish I could stop recording." He sighed heavily. "But something happened yesterday." He held up another folder. "I intentionally left this file in my office." He smiled sadly. "It contained copies. Not originals." He looked straight into the camera. "Someone searched through my desk." He slowly opened the folder. They removed only the pages mentioning one investment account. His expression hardened. They ignored everything else. They knew exactly what they were looking for. A knot formed in my stomach. Daniel continued. "I didn't accuse anyone. I simply replaced the papers." And waited. He folded his hands together. 2 days later, someone came back. Silence. He shook his head. They never realized the originals were already somewhere else. The video ended. I leaned back in my chair. Someone had entered Daniel's office repeatedly, without permission, searching for specific documents. I looked toward the closed study door. The room suddenly felt different, almost violated. Had those searches happened while I slept upstairs, while I visited friends, while I shopped for groceries? How had I never noticed? A soft knock interrupted my thoughts. I nearly jumped. "Mom," Michael's voice came from downstairs. "I was in the neighborhood. I brought lunch." My heart pounded. I hadn't invited him. I quickly removed the flash drive, closed every folder, shut the laptop, then placed the tiny device inside my sweater pocket. Only after making sure everything looked normal did I walk downstairs. Michael stood in the kitchen holding 2 paper bags from my favorite deli. "I thought you probably hadn't eaten." He smiled warmly, just as he always had. He looked tired. His tie hung loose. His eyes were slightly red. He still looked like a grieving son, and suddenly I hated myself for doubting him. Maybe Daniel had misunderstood. Maybe I was letting fear poison everything. "I'm sorry for just showing up," Michael said. "I know you wanted some space. It's all right." He unpacked sandwiches, soup, fresh fruit, exactly the things Daniel always ordered. For a few minutes we simply ate together, almost normally. Then Michael looked toward the hallway. "You've been in Dad's office." I froze for the smallest fraction of a second. "Just looking around," he nodded. "I figured." He stirred his soup. "When you're ready, we should probably organize his files." "I'll get to it. Dad kept backups of everything." He smiled, although sometimes only he understood his filing system. I forced a small laugh. So true. Michael hesitated. "Did you happen to find—" He stopped himself. "Find what?" He looked away almost immediately. "Nothing. I was just wondering if he left any notes." "No." The lie left my mouth before I could reconsider. Michael studied my face for a brief moment, then nodded. "Okay." We finished lunch talking about relatives who had attended the funeral, neighbors, church friends, completely ordinary conversation. Yet underneath every word I felt something neither of us acknowledged. Questions, unspoken ones. When Michael finally left, I locked the front door behind him. I stood there listening as his car pulled away. Only after the sound disappeared did I exhale. Back upstairs, I returned to Daniel's office. The flash drive felt heavier than before. I plugged it back into the computer. Another folder caught my attention. Its name was different from the others. Not a date, not a month. Simply 3 words. "Watch this last." Below it, Daniel had typed a single sentence. "Because after this, you'll know who I stopped trusting first." I stared at those words for a long time. Whatever waited inside that folder, it was the answer Daniel hadn't been ready to tell me in person. And for the first time since opening the flash drive, I wasn't sure I truly wanted to know. I didn't open the folder labeled "Watch This Last." Not because I wasn't curious, because I was afraid. Daniel had organized everything with the precision that defined his entire career. If he wanted me to wait until the end, there had to be a reason. He knew me well enough to understand that grief could cloud judgment. He was asking me to build the whole picture before drawing conclusions. For the first time since his funeral, I realized that even after his death, my husband was still guiding me. I closed the folder without opening it. Instead, I returned to the earlier recordings. Daniel had always believed that facts came before emotions. So would I. The next video was shorter than the others. Daniel sat at his desk holding up a yellow legal pad covered with handwritten notes. "If you're still following my instructions, thank you." He managed a tired smile. "I know this is painful." He tapped the notebook. "I've started documenting every unusual event." The camera shifted downward. I recognized Daniel's handwriting immediately. Every page listed dates, times, names, conversations, packages that arrived. Phone calls that ended abruptly when he entered the room. Documents that disappeared. Conversations interrupted. Nothing dramatic. Each incident alone seemed meaningless. Together, they painted an entirely different picture. Daniel looked back into the camera. "When something happens once, it's usually coincidence. When it happens twice, you pay attention. When it keeps happening, you start writing everything down." The recording ended. I opened the scanned notebook. There were dozens of pages. One entry immediately caught my attention. March 11th. Michael insisted on filing investment paperwork himself. Later discovered one account statement missing, unsure whether related. Another. April 2nd, Rebecca encouraged Scarlett to simplify financial records. Odd timing after missing documents. Another. April 18th. Office desk slightly rearranged. Nothing stolen except copies of investment summaries. Originals remain elsewhere. Then another. May 7th, Victor called unexpectedly. Asked unusually detailed questions about estate planning. Did not answer. Victor. The name appeared for the first time. Victor Langford, our financial advisor. Daniel had trusted him for nearly 15 years. Victor had helped us plan our retirement. He attended our 25th wedding anniversary. He even sent flowers when my mother passed away. Why had Daniel written down his name? I continued reading. The entries became more frequent as the months passed, sometimes 2 or 3 in a single day. Daniel hadn't been paranoid. He'd been observing, quietly, methodically, like the accountant he had always been. Around noon, my phone buzzed. Rebecca. I hesitated before answering. "Hi, Scarlett." Her voice sounded unusually cheerful. "I hope I'm not interrupting." "No." "I was thinking," she paused politely, "maybe I could stop by this afternoon." "For what?" I noticed there were still flowers everywhere after the funeral. "I thought I could help tidy up." It was a thoughtful offer, exactly the kind Rebecca usually made. She had always been organized, practical, helpful. "I appreciate that. I'll only stay an hour." Before I could politely decline, she added, "And Michael has a meeting all afternoon, so it'll just be us." Something about that sentence stayed with me. She wanted to come while Michael wasn't there. Was that significant? Or was I beginning to suspect everyone unfairly? I suppose that's all right. Wonderful. I'll be there around 2. An hour later, I quietly removed the flash drive from my laptop. I wrapped it inside one of Daniel's old wool socks. Then I placed the sock inside a dusty box of Christmas decorations on the highest shelf of the guest bedroom closet. No one would think to look there. At least I hoped not. Before Rebecca arrived, I walked into Daniel's office again. This time I wasn't looking for videos. I was looking at the actual paperwork. The filing cabinets remained exactly as Daniel had left them. Each drawer carried neatly printed labels: investments, banks, insurance, property, taxes. I opened the investment drawer. Every folder sat perfectly aligned, until one caught my attention. Its tab looked newer than the rest. The label had been printed with a different font. Daniel never mixed fonts, never. I carefully removed the folder. Inside were recent account statements. At first glance, everything appeared ordinary. Then I remembered the forged statements from the videos. I compared dates. Several monthly statements were missing. Not misplaced, missing entirely. Instead, quarterly summaries had replaced them. Why Daniel had always kept every monthly statement, every single one, for decades. I continued searching. The property folder contained copies of our home deed, vacation property records, insurance policies. Again, several documents appeared newer than surrounding papers. Different paper, different staples. Even the hole punches looked cleaner. Someone had inserted replacement documents. But when the doorbell rang, Rebecca. I closed the filing cabinet exactly as I had found it. By the time I reached the front door, I had forced a smile onto my face. Rebecca embraced me warmly. "Oh, Scarlett, I'm so sorry. I keep expecting Daniel to walk through the door." "So do I." She handed me a casserole dish. "I figured you probably haven't felt like cooking." "Thank you." She followed me into the kitchen. Within minutes, she had already begun washing dishes left from visitors after the funeral. She chatted naturally, asked about relatives, shared funny memories about Daniel teaching Ethan chess. Nothing felt forced, nothing felt suspicious, which somehow made everything even harder. After nearly 30 minutes, she casually asked, "Have you started sorting through Daniel's office yet?" There it was. The question arrived so naturally that someone else might never have noticed. "Not really," she nodded. "I know it'll be emotional." "It is." She dried another plate. "Michael worries you're taking on too much alone." "I'll manage." "I'm sure you will." Another pause. "If you'd like, I could organize the paperwork while you rest." I smiled politely. "That's kind of you. But I'm not ready." "I understand." Her answer came instantly, almost rehearsed. She continued drying dishes. Then almost casually, she asked another question. "Did Daniel ever mention where he kept backup financial records?" I nearly stopped breathing. "No. He was always so careful." She laughed softly. "I swear that man had copies of everything." "That's true. I've found duplicate files before." She smiled. "I guess accountants never really retire." I laughed politely. Inside, my heart pounded. She knew Daniel kept duplicates. How had Daniel told her? Or had she seen them herself? Rebecca left shortly after 3. As I watched her drive away, I noticed something unusual. She didn't leave immediately. Her SUV remained parked across the street for nearly 2 minutes. Then she made a phone call. Only afterward did she pull away. Maybe she was calling Michael. Maybe she was arranging dinner. Maybe, or maybe not. I hated that every ordinary action now seemed suspicious. That evening, I drove across town to meet Benjamin Harris. Daniel's attorney had called earlier and asked if we could speak privately, not at his office. At a small coffee shop neither my family nor his clients usually visited. Benjamin was already waiting when I arrived. He stood to hug me. "I'm sorry, Scarlett." "So am I." We ordered coffee. Neither of us touched it. Benjamin studied me quietly before speaking. "Daniel told me there might come a time when you'd visit." A chill ran through me. "He expected this." Benjamin nodded slowly. "He hoped he was wrong." I swallowed hard. "He wasn't." Benjamin's expression grew more serious. "He left instructions." He reached into his leather briefcase. For one hopeful moment, I thought he might produce answers. Instead, he removed a sealed manila envelope. Across the front, in Daniel's unmistakable handwriting, were 7 simple words: "Give to Scarlett only if she comes alone." Benjamin slid the envelope across the table. "I've been waiting 3 weeks." My hands trembled as I picked it up. "Daniel made me promise something." "What?" Benjamin looked directly into my eyes. "No matter what happens, don't let anyone pressure you into signing estate documents until you've spoken to me." A knot tightened in my stomach. "Has someone already tried?" Benjamin didn't answer immediately. Instead, he asked quietly, "Scarlett?" "Has Michael mentioned probate?" "Yes." "And Rebecca?" "Yes." Benjamin slowly nodded. "I thought they might." My pulse quickened. "What aren't you telling me?" Benjamin took a long breath before answering. 3 weeks before he died, Daniel asked me to prepare an entirely separate file. What kind of file? One that could only be opened after someone provided a specific password. "A password?" Benjamin nodded. "I don't know what it is." Daniel refused to write it down. "Then who knows it?" Benjamin's eyes softened. He smiled when I asked the same question. "And what did he say?" Benjamin leaned forward. "He said, 'If anything happens to me, Ethan will remember exactly what matters.'" I stared at him in stunned silence. Daniel hadn't trusted a banker, or an attorney, or even me. He had trusted an 8-year-old boy to protect the final piece of the truth. I drove home from this coffee shop with Benjamin's sealed envelope resting on the passenger seat beside me. I didn't touch it, not once. The streetlights blurred through my windshield as dusk settled over Columbus, and I kept hearing Benjamin's final words. "If anything happens to me, Ethan will remember exactly what matters." Daniel had trusted our 8-year-old grandson with something even his attorney didn't know. It sounded impossible, and yet everything that had happened over the past 24 hours had once sounded impossible, too. When I reached home, I carried the envelope inside as carefully as though it were made of glass. The house was dark except for the small lamp in the living room. For the first time in decades, I locked the deadbolt behind me before pulling every curtain closed. I wasn't sure who I was protecting myself from anymore, or whether I was simply protecting Daniel's secrets. I placed the envelope on the dining room table. My name was written across the front in Daniel's familiar block letters. Scarlett. Nothing more. No instructions, no warnings. I slowly slid my finger beneath the seal. Inside were only 3 things: a folded letter, a business card, a small brass key. The key immediately caught my attention. It wasn't a house key or a car key. It was much smaller, the kind used for old lockboxes or filing cabinets. I turned it over. A tiny number had been engraved into one side. 214. Nothing else. No company name, no address, no explanation. I set it beside the letter. Daniel's handwriting filled the first page. "My dearest Scarlett, if Benjamin has given you this envelope, then you've already discovered the flash drive." A lump formed in my throat. Even now it felt as though Daniel were sitting across the table speaking directly to me. I wish none of this had become necessary. "Please remember something before you continue. Do not let fear replace wisdom. Suspicion without proof destroys families faster than lies ever could." I stopped reading for a moment. That sentence sounded exactly like Daniel. Even now he wasn't encouraging anger. He was urging patience. I continued. "You will soon begin noticing things that no longer make sense. Some people will disappoint you. Others will surprise you. Please don't decide who is guilty until you've seen every piece of evidence." My eyes filled with tears. Daniel knew me well. He knew how protective I was of our family. He knew I would struggle to believe anyone close to us could betray his trust. The letter continued. Benjamin doesn't know what key 2 of 14 opens. Neither does anyone else. You'll understand when the time is right. For now, keep it hidden. Then came one final paragraph. If you ever begin doubting yourself, spend time with Ethan. Children remember truth differently than adults. Adults edit memories. Children usually don't. I folded the letter carefully. There was no mention of Michael, no mention of Rebecca, no accusations, only another reminder to trust facts over assumptions. Daniel was leading me somewhere one careful step at a time. The following morning, my phone rang shortly after breakfast. It was Ethan. Or rather, Rebecca's phone, with Ethan speaking excitedly in the background. "Grandma." His cheerful voice instantly brightened the room. "Hi, sweetheart. Mom said I could call. I miss Grandpa." "So do I." There was a pause. Then Ethan lowered his voice. "Can I come see you today?" Before I answered, I heard Rebecca in the background. "Ask Grandma nicely." "I am asking nicely." I smiled despite everything. "I'd love that." Rebecca returned to the phone. "If it's not inconvenient?" "Not at all. I'll drop him off after lunch." "Perfect." When we hung up, I remembered Daniel's letter. Spend time with Ethan. Perhaps today wasn't a coincidence. Ethan arrived carrying his favorite backpack and an oversized stuffed dinosaur. The moment he stepped through the door, he wrapped both arms around me. The hug lasted much longer than usual. Neither of us said anything. Children often understand grief better than adults give them credit for. "I brought Grandpa's puzzle." He reached into his backpack and pulled out a 1,000-piece jigsaw puzzle. We never finished it. I looked at the box. It showed an old lighthouse overlooking the Atlantic Ocean. Daniel had loved lighthouses. "So let's finish it together." For the next hour, we sat at the dining room table, sorting tiny blue and gray pieces. It felt strangely normal, comforting. Eventually, Ethan looked toward Daniel's empty chair. "I keep forgetting. Forgetting what? That Grandpa isn't coming back." His small voice nearly broke my heart. "I do too." He nodded slowly. Then, after several quiet minutes, he spoke again. "Grandpa said grown-ups forget important things." I looked at him carefully. "What kind of important things?" He concentrated on fitting together 2 puzzle pieces. "The little things." "What little things?" "He said adults stop listening because they're busy." I remembered Daniel saying almost the same thing years ago while Ethan was learning to read. "Did Grandpa tell you anything else?" Ethan shrugged. "He said if people started arguing after he got sick." I should remember the game. The game. My pulse quickened. "What game?" "The secret words." I tried not to sound too eager. "What secret words?" He frowned. "I promised not to tell." I smiled gently. "You promised Grandpa?" He nodded firmly. "I don't want to break my promise." For a moment, disappointment washed over me. Then I remembered Daniel. He would never ask Ethan to break a promise carelessly. Maybe there was another way. "What if Grandpa wanted you to tell me?" Ethan looked uncertain. "He said—" He stopped. "What did he say?" He said, "Only tell Grandma after she finds the movies." The movies, the videos on the flash drive. Daniel had anticipated this conversation. "I found them." Ethan looked up immediately. "You did?" "Yes." "The ones Grandpa made?" "Yes," he smiled. "I knew you would." "Then maybe now it's okay." He thought very seriously for nearly half a minute. Finally, he nodded. "I think it is." He climbed down from his chair. "Come here." I followed him into the living room. He pointed toward Daniel's grandfather clock. "The words are hiding." "Hiding where?" He opened the small cabinet beneath the clock pendulum. Taped inside was a folded index card. I stared in amazement. Daniel had hidden something inside the clock all along. Ethan proudly handed me the card. I wasn't supposed to forget. I unfolded it. There were only 5 handwritten words: bluebird, cedar, lighthouse, August, always, nothing else, no explanation, 5 unrelated words. "What do they mean?" Ethan grinned. "It's the password." "The password," he nodded enthusiastically, "for the really secret computer." I stared at the card. Daniel hadn't trusted Ethan to remember random letters or numbers. He'd created a memory game only a child would never forget. Bluebird, cedar, lighthouse, August, always. Each word represented one of Ethan's favorite memories with Grandpa. The bluebird they watched every spring, the cedar tree where they built a birdhouse, the lighthouse puzzle, their August camping trip, and Daniel's favorite saying, "Always choose kindness before judgment." No wonder Ethan remembered. Those weren't random words. They were pieces of love. Rebecca arrived to pick Ethan up just before dinner. As he hugged me goodbye, he whispered another sentence. "So you found the first clue?" I blinked. "The first clue," he smiled proudly. "There are more." Before I could ask another question, Rebecca called from the front porch. "Ethan." "I'm coming." He ran outside. Rebecca waved warmly. "I hope he wasn't too much trouble." "He was wonderful," she smiled. "He adores being here." "I adore having him." After they drove away, I locked the door once again. The house fell silent. I walked upstairs carrying the index card. My heart beat faster with every step toward Daniel's study. The encrypted folder Benjamin had mentioned was still sitting unopened on the flash drive. Now, I finally had what might be its password. I slipped the flash drive into my laptop. The folder appeared immediately. A password window opened. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. Bluebird, Cedar, Lighthouse. August. Always. I carefully typed the 5 words exactly as Daniel had written them. Then I pressed enter. For 3 long seconds, nothing happened. Then the screen flickered. A progress bar slowly filled from left to right, and with a soft click, the encrypted folder opened. Inside waited dozens of new files, but one stood apart from all the others. A single video. Its title sent a chill through my entire body. The day I realized we were no longer alone. For nearly a full minute, I couldn't bring myself to click the video. Its title alone was enough to make my pulse race. The day I realized we were no longer alone. Daniel had never been dramatic. In 43 years of marriage, he never exaggerated, never used sensational language, and never tried to frighten anyone into believing him. If he chose those words, he meant them exactly as they were written. I took a slow breath. "All right, Daniel," I whispered to the empty room. "I'm listening." I clicked the file. The screen faded in. Daniel appeared sitting in his office, but something immediately looked different. Instead of speaking directly to the camera, he kept glancing toward the closed office door every few seconds as though expecting someone to walk in. His voice was calm but lower than usual. "Today's date is September 17th. He looked down at a notebook before continuing. "I wasn't planning to make another recording today." He sighed. "But something happened this afternoon that changed everything." He leaned closer. "For months I believed someone was searching through my paperwork while we were away." He paused. "Today I confirmed it." My hands tightened around the arms of the chair. Daniel reached beneath his desk and held up a tiny black device. It took me a moment to recognize it. A miniature motion-activated camera. "I bought this 2 weeks ago." A faint smile crossed his face. I felt ridiculous installing it. I even hoped it would prove I was imagining things. His expression became serious again. It didn't. The video paused automatically. Another file opened by itself. Security camera footage. The timestamp read September 17th, 2:16 p.m. The office was empty. Sunlight streamed through the window exactly as it did every afternoon. Nothing happened for nearly 30 seconds. Then the office door slowly opened. I leaned closer. Michael stepped inside. He looked around cautiously before closing the door behind him. A sharp pain spread through my chest. Our son. Michael walked directly to Daniel's desk. He opened the top drawer, then the second, then the filing cabinet beside the desk. His movements weren't hurried. They were practiced, purposeful, as though he already knew exactly where everything belonged. He removed several folders, flipped rapidly through their contents, stopped at one particular document, photographed it with his phone, returned it to the folder, closed everything exactly as he had found it. Then he quietly left. The entire visit lasted less than 3 minutes. I stared at the frozen image on my laptop. Maybe Daniel had asked him to retrieve something. Maybe there was a perfectly reasonable explanation. Before I could finish the thought, another recording began. Daniel appeared again. "You've just seen Michael." His voice remained remarkably calm. "I wish I could tell you this was the first time." He shook his head. "It wasn't. I counted 7 visits over the past month." He reached for another folder. I never confronted him. Not because I was afraid. Because I still believed there had to be an explanation. I closed my eyes. That sounded exactly like Daniel. He had searched for the best in people until the very end. "I decided to test my theory," Daniel continued. "I placed several harmless financial summaries inside the drawer. They contained intentionally incorrect numbers. They looked convincing. They were completely fake." Another video automatically opened. This one carried a different timestamp. September 24, 4:42 p.m. Again the office remained empty. Again the door opened. This time it wasn't Michael. Rebecca entered quietly. She moved with surprising confidence. She never hesitated. She walked directly to the same drawer Michael had searched the week before. She removed the exact same folder. Instead of reading the papers, she took several photographs with her phone. Then something unexpected happened. She picked up her cell phone and made a call. Although the security camera couldn't capture the conversation clearly, the microphone recorded enough. Yes. A pause. I found the updated numbers. Another pause. No. He hasn't noticed anything. She listened. I'll send them in 10 minutes. Then she hung up. I felt the blood drain from my face. Rebecca wasn't speaking to Michael. She was speaking to someone else. Someone waiting for information. The footage ended. Another recording appeared. Daniel looked older than he had in previous videos. Not physically, emotionally. I wanted to believe Rebecca was helping Michael organize paperwork. He lowered his eyes. I can't believe that anymore. He folded his hands. But there's something even stranger. He looked directly into the camera. Neither of them ever took the original documents. They only photographed them. He paused. Which means someone else wanted copies. The recording ended. I sat in stunned silence. The room suddenly felt too small, too quiet. Daniel had been right. Someone outside our family was involved. But who and why? I opened another folder. This one contained scanned pages from Daniel's notebook. Most entries described the office visits I'd already seen. Then one sentence caught my attention. Michael appears nervous. Rebecca appears confident. They are behaving differently. One knows more than the other. Another entry. Neither asks about my health anymore, only finances. Very unlike them. Then another. Victor visited today. Asked unusual questions about changing beneficiary designations. Declined to answer. Victor again. The name appeared repeatedly. Not every day, but often enough to stand out. Each time Daniel had written nearly the same observation. Too interested in estate planning, asked about investment passwords, requested unnecessary meetings, pressed for immediate decisions. I pushed back from the desk. Victor Langford. Until now he had remained little more than a name inside Daniel's notes. Now he was beginning to emerge as something far more significant. I reached for my phone. My contacts still listed him under Victor Langford, Financial Advisor. His smiling profile photo looked perfectly ordinary, middle-aged, well-dressed, professional, the same man who had attended our Christmas dinners, the same man who had hugged me after Daniel's diagnosis, the same man who promised he would help the family through every financial decision. A cold shiver traveled down my spine. Had he already known more than he admitted? I wasn't ready to answer that question. Instead, I returned to the laptop. Another folder waited. Its title read Office Audio. Unlike the videos, these were only sound recordings. I opened the first. For several seconds, there was only silence. Then footsteps, a drawer opening, papers rustling, Michael's voice, soft, barely above a whisper. I don't understand these numbers, Rebecca answered quietly. You don't have to. We just need pictures. Michael sounded uncertain. What if Dad notices? He won't. You don't know that. A pause. Then Rebecca spoke again. Victor said this is completely normal. There was silence. Finally, Michael sighed. I don't like hiding things from them. Rebecca answered almost immediately. This isn't hiding. It's protecting our future. The recording ended. I stared at the screen without moving. Michael hadn't sounded greedy. He sounded uncomfortable. Rebecca, she sounded convinced someone else's plan was necessary. Daniel's notebook suddenly made more sense. One knows more than the other. Maybe Michael truly believed he was helping. Maybe Rebecca believed Victor. Or maybe they both did. Either way, neither seemed to realize they were being recorded. I played another audio file. This one was much shorter. Victor's voice filled the speakers. Smooth, confident, professional. Daniel, I really think we should simplify these accounts. Daniel answered politely. I'm comfortable with the current arrangement. Victor laughed softly. You're making things unnecessarily complicated for your family, Daniel replied without hesitation. My family has never struggled with honesty. Several seconds of silence followed. Then Victor spoke again. Sometimes honesty needs a little organization. Daniel never responded. The recording ended. I replayed Victor's final sentence twice. There was something unsettling about it. Not threatening, calculated. Like someone accustomed to persuading people into decisions they hadn't intended to make. Outside rain began tapping softly against the study window. I looked toward Daniel's empty chair. I understand now, I whispered. You weren't just protecting the money. No, he had been protecting the people he loved, including Michael, including Rebecca, even as they unknowingly walked deeper into someone else's trap. My eyes returned to the laptop. There were still dozens of unopened files, but one folder now stood out among all the rest. It hadn't been there before, or perhaps I simply hadn't noticed it. Its name appeared in bold letters: "Do not contact Victor until you've seen everything." For the second time since discovering the flash drive, Daniel had left me a direct instruction. And judging by everything I just watched, ignoring that warning could cost far more than I yet understood. I read the folder title 3 times. "Do not contact Victor until you've seen everything." Every instinct told me to pick up the phone. I wanted to hear Victor Langford's voice. I wanted to ask him why he had been so interested in Daniel's estate while my husband was still alive. I wanted to demand an explanation for the conversations I had just watched and heard. Instead, I closed my eyes. Daniel had already anticipated this reaction. That was why he had left the warning. He knew me well enough to understand that once I believed someone had betrayed us, I would confront them immediately. But Daniel had always believed that the person asking questions rarely controlled the conversation. The person holding the evidence did. "I'll do this your way," I whispered, "for as long as I can." I clicked past the warning and opened the next folder. Its title read, "Office Camera Extended Archive." There were nearly 40 recordings. Most lasted only a few minutes. Daniel had apparently configured the motion sensor to record whenever anyone entered the office. I began with the oldest clip that hadn't yet been viewed. The timestamp showed a Tuesday afternoon in early October. Daniel and Victor sat across from one another in the office. Coffee mugs rested on the desk between them. From their expressions alone, anyone would have assumed 2 longtime friends were discussing retirement. Victor smiled warmly. "Daniel, you've always been one of my easiest clients." Daniel returned a polite smile. "I've always appreciated your help." "I mean that." Victor leaned forward. "But we need to update your estate plan. I reviewed everything last week." Daniel folded his hands. "I don't believe any major changes are necessary." Victor laughed softly. "I know accountants. You people hate changing anything." Daniel chuckled. "Guilty." For nearly 10 minutes, they discussed perfectly ordinary financial matters. Investment performance, tax strategies, charitable donations, nothing unusual. Then Victor casually asked, "And Scarlett still doesn't like looking at the investment statements?" Daniel smiled. "She trusts me." Victor nodded. "That's a blessing." Another pause. "What about Michael? What about him?" "Have you started teaching him where everything is?" Daniel answered carefully. "Only what he needs to know." Victor stirred his coffee. "Families run much more smoothly when the next generation understands the finances before it's too late." Daniel's smile disappeared almost imperceptibly. "I'll decide when that time comes." Victor quickly changed the subject. If I hadn't already known something was wrong, I probably would have missed the exchange completely. But now, every question sounded different. Every pause mattered. The recording ended. I opened another. This one was dated only 6 days later. Again, Victor visited. Again, they discussed investments. Then Victor asked another seemingly harmless question. "Where do you keep your backup files?" Daniel looked at him without answering. Victor laughed. "You always keep backups." "I've known you 15 years. Daniel smiled faintly. "Old habits." Victor waited. "So," Daniel shrugged. "Safe enough." Victor's expression remained pleasant, but disappointment flickered across his face for only a fraction of a second. Then he smiled again. The meeting ended. I sat back slowly. Victor wasn't asking random questions. He was gathering information, little by little, without ever sounding suspicious. Daniel had noticed. That was why he started recording. I opened another file. This one wasn't a video. It was a spreadsheet. Its title was Questions Victor Asked. Daniel had actually made a list. Every conversation, every unusual question, every request. The pattern became obvious almost immediately. Victor repeatedly asked about only 5 topics: estate planning, investment passwords, backup records, beneficiary changes, property deeds, nothing else, not Daniel's health, not Scarlett, not retirement, only documents, only control, only access. I suddenly remembered something that had seemed insignificant at the time. 3 months before Daniel died, Victor had visited us for dinner. Halfway through the evening, I had excused myself to answer a phone call from my sister. When I returned, Daniel and Victor had abruptly stopped talking. I assumed they had finished their conversation. Now, I wondered what I had interrupted. Another memory surfaced. 2 weeks later, Victor unexpectedly sent Michael an invitation to lunch. Michael mentioned it casually. Victor just wants to give me some financial advice. I hadn't thought anything of it. Neither had Daniel. At least, not then, but perhaps afterward he had. I continued searching the files. Another folder caught my attention. Vehicle, camera, vehicle. Daniel had installed a camera in the car, curious. I opened the first recording. The image showed the inside of Daniel's SUV. The camera pointed toward the front seats. A timestamp showed late October. Daniel entered the driver's seat. Several minutes later, Victor climbed into the passenger seat. Apparently, they had met outside Victor's office before driving somewhere together. Victor laughed. "I still think you're overreacting." Daniel started the engine. "I hope you're right." Victor looked out the window. "Then stop making copies of everything." Daniel didn't answer. Victor continued, "You'll only worry Scarlett." "I haven't told Scarlett anything." "Exactly." Victor smiled. "So stop worrying yourself, too." Daniel finally spoke. "I worry when numbers stop making sense." Victor laughed again. "You're the only accountant I know who loses sleep over paperwork." Daniel replied quietly, "No. I lose sleep when paperwork changes by itself." The vehicle fell silent. Neither man spoke for nearly 2 minutes. Then Victor changed the subject entirely. I paused the recording. Daniel had challenged him directly, not with accusations, with facts. Victor never answered. He simply redirected the conversation. The more evidence I watched, the more I admired my husband. He never confronted anyone emotionally. He simply observed, recorded, waited. He had built an entire investigation without anyone realizing it. My eyes wandered to Daniel's photograph sitting beside the computer. "You were so much smarter than all of us." A lump formed in my throat. "And you carried this alone." The realization hurt almost as much as losing him. How frightened must he have been? How lonely. He couldn't tell me. Couldn't tell Michael. Couldn't even tell Benjamin everything. Instead, he quietly documented the truth while pretending life was normal. No one should have to carry that burden. My phone vibrated across the desk. Michael. For several seconds, I considered letting it ring. Instead, I answered. "Hi, Mom." His voice sounded strained. "Everything all right?" "I think so. I was wondering if I could stop by tomorrow." "What for?" "I found one of Dad's storage boxes in my garage. I thought maybe it belonged with his office files." Storage box, Daniel had never mentioned one. "Of course. I'll bring it around noon." "Thank you." There was a hesitation. "Mom?" "Yes. I know the last few weeks have been difficult." "They have. If you ever find anything confusing in Dad's paperwork, please let me help." I looked toward the laptop. "I appreciate that." "I mean it." "I know." Another pause. "I miss him." His voice cracked. For the first time in days, the pain sounded genuine, not rehearsed, not calculated, real. "So do I. I just wish—" He stopped speaking. "What?" I wish I'd listened to him more. Before I could answer, he quietly said goodbye and ended the call. I remained staring at my phone. Daniel's notes suddenly echoed in my mind. Michael appears nervous. Rebecca appears confident. The recording supported that observation. Michael never sounded like someone orchestrating a crime. He sounded confused, pressured, uncertain. Rebecca, however, seemed convinced every step was justified. And Victor always sounded completely in control. Perhaps Daniel had been right. Perhaps there were different levels of responsibility, different degrees of guilt. I wasn't ready to judge any of them, not yet. There was still too much I didn't know. I turned back to the computer. Another folder waited. Its title made my heartbeat quicken once again. Private Meetings Hidden Camera, below it. Daniel had written a short note. I never intended to spy on anyone. I only wanted to know whether I had become paranoid. Instead, I learned I wasn't paranoid enough. I swallowed hard. If Daniel believed these recordings were even more important than everything I had already seen, then whatever waited inside them was about to change my understanding of my own family once again. I read Daniel's note twice before opening the folder. I never intended to spy on anyone. I only wanted to know whether I had become paranoid. Instead, I learned I wasn't paranoid enough. For a long moment, my hand rested on the mouse without moving. Daniel had always respected people's privacy. Installing cameras had probably gone against every instinct he possessed. If he had reached that point, he must have exhausted every other option first. I clicked the first recording. The video opened to the conference room I immediately recognized. It wasn't inside our home. It was inside Victor Langford's financial planning office. The camera angle surprised me. Daniel had apparently hidden a tiny recording device inside a leather portfolio he often carried to meetings. The image captured only part of the room, but the audio was remarkably clear. Victor entered first. A minute later, Michael walked in. My son looked uncomfortable. He loosened his tie before sitting down across from Victor. Victor smiled warmly. "Thank you for coming," Michael nodded. "I only have about 30 minutes. This won't take long." Victor slid a folder across the table. "I've been reviewing your parents' estate." Michael frowned. "Dad doesn't like discussing that." Victor chuckled. "Your father is extremely cautious. I've noticed. He thinks everything needs to be documented." Michael smiled faintly. "That's because he was an accountant." Victor leaned back. "And because of that, your mother could be overwhelmed if something happens." Michael's expression changed. "What do you mean?" "I mean grief." Victor folded his hands. "Your father handles every financial detail." "If he were gone tomorrow, would your mother know where everything is?" Michael hesitated. "Probably not." "Exactly." Victor lowered his voice. "Someone has to help her." The recording continued. Victor never once suggested stealing, never once mentioned fraud. Instead, he framed every conversation around responsibility, protection, preparation, helping family, listening without context. I could understand why Michael trusted him. Victor sounded compassionate, reasonable, almost fatherly. Then Victor opened another folder. "I've prepared a transition plan." Michael glanced at the documents. "What's this?" "A list of accounts, insurance, investment summaries." "Nothing complicated." Michael looked uncertain. "Dad hasn't asked me to do any of this." Victor smiled patiently. "He will. He just doesn't know it yet." The meeting ended shortly afterward. I sat silently. Daniel had been right. Michael wasn't acting like someone plotting against his parents. He was listening to someone he believed was an expert, someone he had known for years, someone Daniel himself had introduced into our lives. I opened the second recording. This time Rebecca sat across from Victor. Unlike Michael, she appeared confident. Victor greeted her warmly. "I appreciate you coming." "I wanted to help." "I know." He handed her several charts. "You understand organization better than Michael." She smiled. "He hates paperwork." Victor laughed. "That's exactly why I wanted to speak with you." He tapped one of the charts. "Daniel has built an unnecessarily complicated financial structure." Rebecca studied the pages carefully. "Can it be simplified?" "Absolutely. But only if we know where every record is." She nodded slowly. "I think Michael can find most of them." Victor smiled. "Excellent." Then came a sentence that made my stomach tighten. "The fewer surprises after Daniel passes away, the easier recovery will be for everyone." Rebecca lowered her eyes. "I don't want Scarlett struggling." "Neither do I." Victor's tone sounded sincere. "Everything we're doing is to protect your family." The meeting continued for another 20 minutes. Not once did Victor mention moving money. Not once did he suggest breaking the law. Instead, he repeatedly encouraged Rebecca to gather information. Copies, account numbers, property records, backup files. Each request sounded harmless on its own. Together, they explained everything I had already seen. Michael searched because he believed he was preparing to help me. Rebecca photographed documents because Victor convinced her organization would reduce confusion. Neither seemed to realize they were slowly giving someone access to every important financial detail Daniel had spent decades protecting. I leaned back in my chair. Victor wasn't manipulating them through fear. He was manipulating them through good intentions. That realization frightened me more than outright greed. Good people are often easier to deceive than dishonest ones. They rarely expect kindness to be used against them. I opened another file. This one wasn't a recording. It was a document Daniel had typed himself. The title read, "Why I Believe Victor is Building Something Larger Below It." Daniel had organized his thoughts into numbered observations. Observation 1. Victor requests information gradually. Never enough to appear suspicious. Always enough to expand his knowledge. Observation. 2 different family members receive different explanations. Michael is told he is protecting Scarlett. Rebecca is told she is simplifying the estate. Neither appears aware of the other's conversations. I felt another chill. Victor wasn't treating them as partners, he was managing them separately, keeping each one focused on only part of his plan. Daniel continued. Observation 3. I requested records directly from financial institutions. Several representatives mentioned similar transition consults involving elderly clients. Same advisor, same recommendations, same urgency. My eyes widened. This wasn't just about our family. Daniel had investigated beyond our own accounts. I scrolled further. Attached were copies of public records, articles, regulatory notices, civil lawsuits from neighboring counties. Not criminal convictions, complaints. Families claiming elderly relatives had been pressured into restructuring investments shortly before serious illnesses or deaths. The advisor's name had been redacted in the public copies, but Daniel had handwritten one sentence beside them. The timelines are almost identical. I opened another scanned page. It listed 6 elderly couples. Next to each name, Daniel had written brief notes, changed estate plans, missing investment summaries, unexpected account consolidations, confused surviving spouses. None of the cases alone proved fraud. Together, the pattern became impossible to ignore. Daniel hadn't discovered a single suspicious transaction. He believed he had uncovered a system, a carefully repeated process. I whispered aloud, "This wasn't only about us." For the first time, I understood the true scope of what Daniel had been trying to expose. Victor wasn't simply after one family's savings. If Daniel's notes were correct, he had spent years earning the trust of aging clients before quietly positioning himself to influence critical financial decisions when families were at their most vulnerable. The realization left me feeling physically ill. I stood and walked to the kitchen for a glass of water. My hands trembled so badly that I nearly dropped it. How many widows had believed they were simply signing routine paperwork? How many sons and daughters had unknowingly gathered information for someone they trusted? How many families had blamed one another instead of questioning the professional standing quietly in the background? I suddenly remembered Rebecca's words from the audio recording. Victor said this is completely normal. She had believed him. Michael had believed him. Because why wouldn't they? Victor had been our advisor for 15 years. Daniel himself had recommended him. Trust had been Victor's greatest asset, and Daniel had finally recognized it before it was too late. My phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Rebecca. "Michael's bringing over one of Daniel's storage boxes tomorrow. I hope that's okay. Maybe it'll help answer some questions." I stared at the message. Questions. She had no idea how many questions already had answers. I typed a brief reply. "That's fine. Thank you. Nothing more, nothing less." The less anyone knew about the flash drive, the safer Daniel's investigation remained. I returned to the study. There were still several unopened documents inside the folder. The final one was addressed directly to me. "Scarlett, read before you decide what to do next." I opened it. Daniel's familiar words appeared on the screen. "If you've reached this point, you now understand why I stopped trusting Victor. But understanding isn't enough. Evidence must survive long enough to matter. That is why I never confronted him, and why you must not confront him yet." I swallowed hard. Daniel had been thinking several steps ahead all along. His next paragraph explained why. If Victor realizes we've discovered the pattern, he'll destroy what remains before anyone can verify it. There is only one way to stop him. Someone outside this family must see everything. I immediately thought of Benjamin Harris, Daniel's attorney. The only person besides me who already knew the flash drive existed. Perhaps that was exactly why Daniel had insisted I contact Benjamin before signing anything. Because this investigation had grown far beyond a dispute inside our family. It had become something that demanded independent eyes. I looked at the growing stack of notes beside my computer. One thing had become unmistakably clear. Michael and Rebecca had made serious mistakes. They had searched Daniel's office, copied private records, kept secrets from me. But the evidence suggested they had not been the architects of the deception. They had been drawn into it, patiently, carefully, by a man who understood that the easiest way to reach vulnerable parents was through the children who only wanted to help. I spent the entire next morning organizing Daniel's evidence into 3 separate piles. One contained everything related to our family's finances. The second contained Daniel's notes about Victor. The third held copies of the public complaints and timelines involving other elderly families. I wasn't trying to solve the mystery anymore. I was trying to understand how much Daniel had already proven. The more I sorted, the more one fact became impossible to ignore. Daniel had never claimed Victor stole our money. He believed Victor had been building access, gathering information, positioning himself, preparing for the moment when grieving families would be too overwhelmed to question complicated financial decisions. Intent, opportunity, preparation, those were the pieces Daniel had documented. Whether the final step had already happened, I still didn't know. At precisely 11:55, I heard Michael's truck pull into the driveway. I looked through the front window. He climbed out carrying a medium-sized cardboard storage box. He looked exhausted. His beard had grown in unevenly over the past week, and his shoulders seemed lower than I had ever seen them. For a brief moment, all I saw was my son mourning his father. Then I remembered the office recordings. I opened the door. "Hi, Mom. Come in." He carefully set the box on the dining room table. "I found this while cleaning my garage." "You had one of Dad's boxes." He nodded. "He asked me to store a few things last winter. I completely forgot about it. When I found it yesterday, I thought you'd want it." I looked down at the faded handwriting on the side. Old tax records. That sounded exactly like something Daniel would write. Michael rubbed the back of his neck. "I never looked inside. I figured it wasn't my business." I studied his face. He seemed sincere. "Let's see what he left." Together we opened the box. The top layer contained exactly what the label promised: old tax returns, receipts, depreciation schedules from rental property we had sold years earlier. Michael smiled weakly. "Dad never threw anything away." "No?" "He always said today's useless paper becomes tomorrow's missing evidence." We both laughed quietly. It felt strange laughing again. Comforting. Then my fingers touched something unexpected beneath the folders. A small spiral notebook. Unlike the other documents, it wasn't labeled. I looked at Michael. "Do you mind?" "Of course not." I opened it. Every page contained handwritten notes. But they weren't financial. They were observations, conversations, questions. Daniel's handwriting again. The first page read, "Things I need to ask Victor." My heartbeat quickened. I glanced toward Michael. He was looking through another stack of tax documents, apparently unaware of what I'd found. I carefully slipped the notebook beneath a folder. "I'll sort through these later." "Take your time." For the next half hour, we organized paperwork together. The conversation stayed comfortably ordinary. Neighbors, church friends, funeral arrangements, Ethan's return to school. Nothing related to money, nothing related to Victor. Finally, Michael stopped sorting. "Mom." "Yes, I need to ask you something." His voice carried genuine uncertainty. "Did Dad ever seem—" He searched for the right word. "Worried?" I kept my expression neutral. "Worried about what?" "I don't know." He stared down at the table. "The last few months?" He kept asking strange questions. "What kind?" Whether I'd ever shared account information. Whether anyone had asked me about his paperwork. Michael frowned. I thought he was just becoming overprotective. My heart sank. Daniel had questioned him directly, exactly as his notes suggested. "What did you tell him?" "The truth." Michael looked me straight in the eye. "I told him Victor had asked me where Dad kept investment summaries." The room suddenly felt very quiet. "You told Victor—" Michael nodded slowly. "Only general things. I figured he needed the information." He looked ashamed. "I didn't think it mattered." I remembered the recordings. Victor never demanded answers. He invited people to volunteer them. Michael continued speaking. "Dad didn't yell. He didn't accuse me. He just thanked me for being honest." A long silence followed. I wish I'd asked him why. He looked toward the window. "I just assumed it was another accountant thing." There was genuine regret in his voice. Not defensiveness, regret. Daniel had been right. Michael hadn't understood what was happening. He had trusted the wrong person. Before I could respond, Michael's phone rang. He glanced at the screen. His expression changed immediately. "It's Victor." I froze. Michael looked uncertain. "I should probably answer." I nodded carefully. "Go ahead." He stepped onto the back patio. Although I couldn't hear every word, the open screen door carried enough of the conversation. "Hi, Victor." "No, I'm at Mom's house." "The storage box." "No. I haven't found anything unusual." My pulse quickened. Victor already knew about the storage box. How Michael listened quietly, then answered, "I understand." Another pause. "No. She hasn't mentioned any financial records." He listened again. "All right. I'll let you know." The call ended. Michael remained standing outside for nearly a minute before coming back inside. He looked uncomfortable. "Everything okay?" "Yeah." He forced a smile. "Victor just wanted to check on you." That was thoughtful. So I thought. But his voice lacked conviction. For the first time, I noticed something else. Michael didn't sound reassured after speaking with Victor. He sounded pressured, as though every conversation left him carrying another responsibility he hadn't asked for. He gathered his jacket. I should get going. Before leaving, he hesitated. Mom? If Victor asks you to sign anything... He stopped himself. What? Michael frowned. Actually, never mind. No. I stepped closer. What were you going to say? He looked genuinely conflicted. I don't know. He shook his head. I've had this strange feeling lately. What feeling? That Dad stopped trusting somebody. My heart skipped. Why would you think that he canceled 2 meetings with Victor? I only found out because Victor complained about it. Michael sighed. Dad never canceled meetings. No, he didn't. Michael stared toward Daniel's empty office door. I should have paid more attention. He left a few minutes later. This time I watched his truck disappear down the street before closing the curtains. The moment I was alone, I retrieved the hidden notebook from beneath the folders. It contained only 20 pages. Each one documented planned questions Daniel intended to ask Victor. Some had already been crossed out. Others remained unanswered. One page stopped me cold. Questions after discovering missing client files. I turned the page. Daniel had written, visited county records office, compared public filings, 3 elderly clients changed financial structures within weeks of terminal diagnoses, all advised by Victor. Another note, requested copies from investment firms, several files unavailable. Representative claimed records had been archived. Need verification. Daniel hadn't limited himself to our own accounts. He had begun tracing Victor's work across multiple families. Then I reached the final page. Unlike the others, it contained only one sentence, written in darker ink, pressed harder against the paper, almost as though Daniel had been angry. If my files disappear, Victor knows I'm close. A chill ran through me. Disappear. Daniel had anticipated evidence being destroyed. Almost instinctively, I looked toward the study, toward the filing cabinets, toward every folder Daniel had spent months protecting. Without warning, my security alarm chimed softly, not the emergency siren. Only the notification that someone had opened the side gate leading to the backyard. I frowned. Michael had already left. I walked quietly toward the kitchen window. At first I saw nothing. Then, a man wearing a dark baseball cap quickly stepped away from the study window and disappeared through the side gate. He moved too fast for me to recognize his face. But one thing was unmistakable. He hadn't approached the front door. He hadn't knocked. He had gone directly to Daniel's office window, watching, looking. And by the time I reached the back porch, he was already gone. Standing alone in the quiet backyard, I suddenly understood why Daniel had copied everything onto the flash drive. Because someone hadn't merely wanted our financial records. Someone had been willing to come back for them, even after Daniel was gone. I stood in the backyard for several minutes, staring through the open side gate. The man was gone. Only the afternoon breeze moved through the maple tree Ethan loved climbing. My first instinct was to call the police. My second was to call Michael. Instead, I remembered Daniel's words. Evidence must survive long enough to matter. If someone had been watching the study window, they were looking for something specific. They believed it was still inside the house. They didn't know Daniel had already placed months of evidence onto a flash drive. And they certainly didn't know I had it. For the moment, that ignorance was my greatest advantage. I locked the side gate, checked every door and window, and returned to Daniel's study. For the first time, I pulled the blinds completely shut. Then I took the flash drive from its hiding place and connected it to my laptop. I needed to know whether Daniel had expected something like this. The answer appeared almost immediately. A folder I hadn't opened yet sat near the bottom of the directory. Its title read, "If They Start Looking." A cold shiver ran through me. Daniel had anticipated even this. I opened it. The first file was another video. Daniel appeared wearing the same blue sweater from his first recording. He looked tired but composed. "Scarlett, if you've opened this folder, then someone has probably become interested in my records." He offered a faint, apologetic smile. "I'm sorry. I hoped you would never need this part." He folded his hands on the desk. "There are only 2 reasons anyone would search this house. They're looking for evidence, or they're trying to confirm whether I found it." He paused. "If they don't know which one is true, keep it that way." I leaned closer to the screen. Daniel continued, "Don't move everything. Don't suddenly empty filing cabinets. Don't make obvious changes. People searching for information notice panic before they notice missing paper." That sounded exactly like him. Calm, practical. Always thinking 3 steps ahead. He reached for a folder beside him. I spent months preparing for the possibility that someone would eventually search this office. Then he smiled, which is why I decided to give them exactly what they expected to find. The video ended. Another document opened automatically. Its title made me blink. Diversion Plan. Daniel had created a diversion. I opened the file. Inside was a detailed explanation of something he called parallel records. For nearly 6 months, he had maintained 2 separate filing systems. One contained genuine financial information. The other contained carefully constructed but entirely false versions of selected documents, fake investment summaries, false account balances, invented transfer schedules, nothing illegal, nothing submitted to any financial institution. Simply convincing-looking copies designed to mislead anyone secretly photographing paperwork. Daniel had even color-coded them. The genuine records used one type of paper. The false records used another that looked nearly identical unless examined closely. I couldn't help smiling through my tears. You incredible man. This wasn't paranoia. It was strategy. Daniel hadn't merely hidden the truth. He had buried it beneath believable distractions. I opened another file. A spreadsheet listed every false document he had created. Beside each one was a note. Observed photographed by Michael October 3rd. Observed photographed by Rebecca October 11th. Left intentionally in upper drawer. Contains incorrect account totals. Another page listed fake beneficiary summaries. Another contained altered property valuations. Daniel hadn't fabricated evidence. He had fabricated bait. Enough to convince anyone spying on him that they already possessed the information they needed, which meant Victor, if he had received those photographs, had been working from false assumptions for months. The realization was astonishing. Daniel hadn't simply protected our records. He had quietly redirected anyone stealing information toward meaningless copies. I whispered softly, "You were buying time." Another video confirmed exactly that. Daniel looked directly into the camera. If Victor or anyone working with him believes they've copied my complete records, they'll become less careful. They'll stop looking. They'll begin acting on incorrect information. He smiled faintly. And people reveal far more when they think they've already won. I remembered something Victor had said in one of the recordings. You're making things unnecessarily complicated. Daniel had done it deliberately, not to confuse himself, to confuse anyone watching him. The next folder contained photographs. At first, they looked ordinary. Pictures of filing cabinets, desk drawers, bookshelves. Then I realized what I was seeing. Daniel had photographed every room before changing anything. Each image included handwritten arrows pointing toward hidden storage locations, behind books, inside old board game boxes, beneath false drawer bottoms. One photograph showed the grandfather clock where Ethan had found the password card. Another revealed something I had never noticed. Inside the bottom drawer of Daniel's filing cabinet was a removable wooden panel. I immediately walked over. The drawer appeared completely normal. I removed the folders, ran my fingers along the base. Nothing. Then I remembered Daniel's photographs. He had pressed against the back corner. I did the same. A soft click. The wooden panel lifted. Beneath it rested a flat manila envelope. My hands trembled as I removed it. Across the front, Daniel had written originals inside were dozens of authentic account statements, original investment confirmations, property records, correspondence with financial institutions. Every document Daniel feared might disappear. Every document he believed mattered most. He had never trusted the filing cabinet itself, only the hidden compartment beneath it. I carefully compared several originals with the fake copies listed on the spreadsheet. The differences were subtle. A changed account balance here, a missing transaction there, enough to mislead someone relying only on photographs, not enough to alarm someone skimming quickly. Daniel understood human behavior better than I ever realized. He knew impatient people rarely examine details. They looked for confirmation, not accuracy. As evening approached, I spread the originals across the dining room table. For the first time, I could see the full scope of his preparation. Copies hidden elsewhere, encrypted digital backups, hidden compartments, false trails, detailed notes, recorded conversations, security footage. He hadn't relied on one safeguard. He had built layers. If one failed, another remained. My phone rang. Benjamin Harris. I answered immediately. Benjamin. Scarlett. His voice sounded unusually serious. I've been reviewing some public filings Daniel asked me to preserve. So have I. There was a brief silence. Has anyone contacted you today? I hesitated. Why answer the question? Yes, my son. I meant besides family. I thought of the man outside the study window. There may have been someone watching the house. Benjamin didn't sound surprised. I was afraid of that. You expected it. I hoped I was wrong. His words echoed Daniel's recordings almost exactly. Benjamin continued. Daniel instructed me to wait until you reached a certain point. I think you've reached it. What point? The point where you understand this was never only about your family. I closed my eyes. I understand now. Good. Benjamin lowered his voice. Tomorrow morning, I want you to bring only the original documents. Not copies. Not the flash drive. Only the originals. Why? Because I already know where the copies are supposed to go. I frowned. What do you mean? Daniel and I prepared for this months ago. My heartbeat quickened. There are more copies, Benjamin answered quietly. Scarlett, your husband didn't build one safety net. He built 3. I looked around the room at the papers covering my dining table. 3 separate layers. Of course he had. That was Daniel, always assuming one plan might fail. Always preparing the next before anyone else imagined it necessary. Benjamin spoke once more before ending the call. Bring the originals. And whatever happens, don't let anyone convince you they're the only remaining evidence. After we hung up, I carefully returned every original document to the envelope. Outside darkness settled over the neighborhood. Somewhere, someone still believed Daniel's real records could be found inside this house. They had no idea that the man they underestimated had spent months ensuring the truth would survive, even if every drawer, every cabinet, and every file inside his home were emptied. For the first time since opening the flash drive, I felt something I hadn't experienced in weeks. Not relief, not happiness. Confidence, because Daniel hadn't left me a mystery. He had left me a roadmap, and step by step it was leading exactly where he intended. The following morning, I arrived at Benjamin Harris's office, carrying only the manila envelope labeled Originals. Just as Daniel had instructed, the flash drive remained hidden inside my house. For the first time since his funeral, I left without it. Benjamin greeted me personally in the lobby. He didn't offer the sympathetic smile I'd grown accustomed to over the past week. Instead, he looked focused, almost relieved. I'm glad you came alone. So am I. He led me into a conference room and closed the door behind us. The blinds were already drawn. A legal pad sat in front of each chair. Benjamin waited until I placed the envelope on the table before speaking. Did anyone follow you? I don't think so. You checked. I drove around the block twice. He nodded approvingly. Daniel taught you well. A faint smile crossed my face despite everything. He certainly tried. Benjamin opened the envelope carefully. He examined several original investment statements before comparing them to copies already waiting inside his own briefcase. I thought so. What is it? These copies came directly from Daniel. He laid them side by side. They're identical. So, Benjamin looked up. It means the originals survived exactly as he intended. He leaned back, which also means anyone working from photographed versions has been relying on Daniel's false records. I felt a surge of admiration for my husband all over again. He really did stay ahead of them. Benjamin nodded. Several steps ahead. He opened another folder. This is what Daniel asked me to prepare. Inside were timelines, names, financial transaction summaries, public filings, everything arranged with the same meticulous organization Daniel had used on the flash drive. Benjamin tapped the first page. I've spent the past several days verifying every document Daniel left. And enough of it has been independently confirmed. He paused. Which means we're no longer dealing with suspicions. We're dealing with evidence. I let out a slow breath. For the first time, someone besides me had verified Daniel's work. It wasn't just the fear of a grieving widow anymore. Benjamin continued. I've already contacted the appropriate investigators. I blinked. You have. I waited until the evidence reached the point Daniel requested. What point? Benjamin smiled faintly. When multiple independent records supported the same pattern. He slid another document toward me. It summarized complaints involving several elderly clients who had worked with Victor Langford. Each complaint seemed minor on its own. Delayed paperwork, confusing account changes, unexpected beneficiary revisions. But together they formed the same pattern Daniel had recognized months earlier. Investigators are reviewing everything. Benjamin lowered his voice. They've also asked us not to confront Victor. I almost laughed. Daniel said exactly the same thing. I know. Benjamin folded his hands. He made me promise. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Benjamin asked quietly, Have you spoken honestly with Michael yet? No. What about Rebecca? No. I think it's time. I looked at him uncertainly. What if they're involved? Benjamin answered carefully. Daniel never concluded they were. He concluded they were being used. There's an important difference. Those words stayed with me all the way home. Being guilty wasn't the same as being manipulated. Daniel had understood that. Now I needed to. That evening I called Michael. Would you and Rebecca come over tonight? His voice immediately grew concerned. Is everything all right? I think we need to talk. We'll be there in 30 minutes. When they arrived, Ethan remained with Rebecca's sister. For that, I was grateful. Children shouldn't have to witness conversations like this. Michael sat at the dining room table, Rebecca beside him. Both looked anxious. I placed 3 coffee mugs on the table before sitting across from them. For several moments, no one spoke. Finally, Michael broke the silence. Mom, what's wrong? I looked at both of them. I need you to answer some questions. Michael nodded immediately. Rebecca looked confused. I'll answer whatever I can. I took a slow breath. Did either of you ever search your father's office without telling me? Silence. Michael stared down at the table. Rebecca's shoulders stiffened. Neither answered. That silence told me more than words could have. I already know. Michael looked up sharply. You know? Yes. He closed his eyes. For nearly 20 seconds, no one spoke. Finally, he whispered, I'm sorry. Rebecca turned toward him in surprise. Michael? He raised his hand gently. No. We can't keep pretending. He looked back at me. I did go into Dad's office. More than once. My heart ached hearing him say it aloud. Why? He rubbed both hands across his face. Because Victor convinced me I needed to. He said if Dad passed unexpectedly, you'd be overwhelmed. He wanted me to learn where everything was. His voice cracked. I honestly believed I was helping. Tears filled his eyes. I swear to you, Mom, I never took any money. I never changed any accounts. I only photographed documents. I thought I was preparing to help you. I believed him, not because he was my son, because everything Daniel had recorded supported exactly what Michael was saying. I turned toward Rebecca. What about you? She remained silent. Then tears slowly rolled down her cheeks. I thought I was protecting this family. Her voice was barely audible. Victor told me Daniel's records were too complicated. He said if something happened, banks would freeze accounts. You might lose access to retirement income. She looked utterly devastated. He said we needed organized copies. She covered her face with trembling hands. I believed him. I reached into the drawer beside me, then carefully placed one sheet of paper onto the table. It was one of Daniel's handwritten notes. Michael recognized the handwriting immediately. Dad, I nodded. He knew someone was searching his office. Rebecca's face turned completely pale. He knew, yes. I placed another page beside it, then another. Neither contained accusations. Only observations, dates, questions, carefully documented facts. Michael read silently. When he reached the line, Michael appears nervous. Rebecca appears confident. One knows more than the other. He began crying openly. He still defended us. I nodded. He never called either of you thieves. Rebecca whispered. He thought we were being manipulated. Yes. She buried her face in her hands. Oh my God. Michael looked at me through tears. Mom, I should have listened. There were so many things that felt wrong. What things? He swallowed hard. Victor always wanted information quickly. He kept saying there wasn't time. He'd call late at night. He'd ask if Dad had signed new documents. I thought he was being thorough. Rebecca slowly nodded. He told me not to burden Daniel with extra questions because stress would make his condition worse. She looked physically sick. So I stopped asking Daniel directly. Instead, I asked Victor. Those words hung painfully in the room. Victor hadn't merely gathered information. He had slowly positioned himself as the person they trusted most on financial matters, exactly as Daniel had feared. Rebecca suddenly stood. I have something. She hurried toward the front hallway where she'd left her purse. When she returned, she held out her phone. I never deleted the messages. I looked at the screen. Weeks of text messages from Victor. Most appeared ordinary. Then one caught my attention. Don't mention this to Daniel until I've organized everything. It'll only create unnecessary stress. Another. Just photograph the updated statements. I'll compare them here. Another. Michael doesn't need every detail yet. Too many opinions complicate transitions. Benjamin had been right. Victor gave different instructions to different people, always keeping them separated, always controlling the flow of information. Rebecca's voice shook. I didn't realize. I honestly didn't. I thought he was helping us prepare. Michael reached for her hand. I believed him too. For the first time since Daniel's funeral, I wasn't looking at two people trying to deceive me. I was looking at two people who finally understood they had been deceived themselves. The room fell silent. Then Michael asked the question I'd been expecting. What happens now? I looked at both of them carefully. The truth. What do you mean? I met with Benjamin this morning. Their eyes widened. He has everything Daniel preserved. Rebecca whispered, everything. Enough. Michael stared at the table. So, Victor doesn't know. No. And he can't. Rebecca slowly nodded. We'll do whatever's necessary. I know. For the first time in days, I truly believed those words. Not because trust had been restored. That would take time. But because the lies separating us had finally been replaced by the truth. And sometimes, the first step toward healing isn't forgiveness. It's finally understanding who the real enemy was all along. The morning after Michael and Rebecca told me everything, my phone rang before 8 o'clock. Benjamin. His voice was steady, but there was an urgency I hadn't heard before. Scarlett, are you home? Yes, stay there. My heart immediately began racing. What's happened? The investigators want to meet with you. Today? Yes. They've finished reviewing the first group of documents. I looked toward Daniel's study. So, they believe him, Benjamin answered without hesitation. They believe the evidence. That distinction sounded exactly like something Daniel would have appreciated. Facts first, opinions second. I'll be there in an hour. No, Benjamin stopped me. They're coming to you. Why? Because they want to see the office exactly as Daniel left it. I agreed immediately. After ending the call, I walked slowly into the study. Everything remained almost untouched. Daniel's leather chair, the neatly arranged bookshelves, the filing cabinet with the hidden compartment, his reading glasses still resting beside the lamp. For the first time since his funeral, I didn't see only reminders of loss. I saw the headquarters of a quiet investigation. An ordinary room where an ordinary man had patiently protected not only his own family, but perhaps many others as well. At 9:30 sharp, Benjamin arrived with two investigators from the state's Financial Crimes Division. One introduced herself as Special Investigator Karen Mills. The other, David Romero, carried a notebook already filled with tabs. They offered condolences first. Only afterward did they begin asking questions. Mrs. Gonzalez, Karen said gently, we understand your husband documented everything personally. He did. Did he ever tell you directly that he believed Victor Langford had committed a crime? I shook my head. No, he never accused anyone. What did he tell you? He told me to trust evidence before emotion. Karen exchanged a quick glance with David. David smiled faintly. That sounds consistent with everything we've read. For nearly 2 hours they examined Daniel's office. I showed them the hidden compartment beneath the filing cabinet, the original statements, the duplicate records, the spreadsheets identifying which documents had been intentionally falsified to mislead anyone photographing them. David looked genuinely impressed. I've worked financial investigations for 18 years. I've never seen preparation like this, Benjamin nodded. Neither have I. Karen carefully photographed every hidden compartment before sealing several original documents into evidence bags. Then she looked at me. Mrs. Gonzalez, your husband gave us something extremely valuable. What? A timeline. She opened her folder. Fraud investigations often fail because victims only remember pieces. Your husband documented events as they happened. She tapped Daniel's notebook. He gave us chronology. And chronology changes everything. Those words filled me with quiet pride. Daniel hadn't been a detective. He hadn't been a police officer. He'd simply been an accountant who refused to ignore numbers that stopped making sense. Karen continued, we've already compared his records with information obtained independently from financial institutions. And, she looked directly at me, the pattern exists. My chest tightened. What pattern? David answered. Victor repeatedly encouraged elderly clients to centralize financial information shortly before major life events. Illness, retirement, probate. He consistently inserted himself into transitional decisions. Benjamin added quietly. Exactly as Daniel suspected. Karen remained careful with her wording. Whether those actions ultimately violated criminal statutes will depend on additional evidence. But, she smiled gently, your husband's documentation gave us somewhere to begin. That alone felt like justice. Not complete justice, but the beginning of it. Later that afternoon, Karen asked whether Michael and Rebecca would be willing to speak voluntarily. I called them immediately. Both agreed without hesitation. An hour later, they sat around my dining room table answering questions they never imagined they'd face. Karen never treated them like suspects. Instead, she asked them to explain every interaction they remembered with Victor. Michael spoke first. He always made everything sound urgent. What kind of urgency? He'd say things like, Michael searched his memory, if we don't organize this now, your mother could face months of delays. Karen wrote several notes. Did he ever ask you to transfer money? No. Did he ever ask you to forge signatures? Never. What did he ask for? Michael lowered his head. Information. Rebecca nodded. Copies. Pictures. Account summaries. Karen continued calmly. Did either of you understand why he wanted them? Both answered simultaneously. No, Rebecca reached into her purse. I brought my phone. She handed it over. Every message is still there. Karen spent several minutes reviewing the conversations. Finally, she looked up. This is very helpful. Rebecca's voice trembled. I feel awful. Karen met her eyes kindly. Mrs. Gonzalez, there are people who intentionally commit fraud. And there are people who are manipulated into helping without understanding the larger picture. Rebecca began crying. I love Daniel. I would have never hurt him. I know. Karen's answer came immediately, and based on everything we've reviewed, I believe your father-in-law knew that too. Michael quietly wiped away tears. He never stopped believing in us. I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. No, he didn't. 2 days later, Benjamin called again. This time, his voice carried something I hadn't heard since Daniel's diagnosis, hope. They've executed the warrants. I stood motionless. Already. Yes. They searched Victor's office this morning. My heart pounded. What happened? They recovered electronic devices, client files, communication records, and, Benjamin paused, they also found copies of documents. What kind? The exact false investment summaries Daniel intentionally left in his office. I closed my eyes. Daniel's diversion had worked. Victor had believed the fake records were genuine for months. Benjamin continued. Those copies established exactly how the information reached him. I thought back to Daniel's spreadsheet. Observed photographed by Michael. Observed photographed by Rebecca. Daniel hadn't merely documented who copied the files. He had documented what those files contained. False information, which meant anyone possessing identical copies could only have obtained them through unauthorized access. David Romero called later that afternoon. Mrs. Gonzalez, yes, I wanted you to hear this directly. I'm listening. We've contacted several of the families your husband identified. What did they say? They described almost identical experiences. Each sentence made my heart heavier. Confusing financial advice, pressure to simplify, requests for copies, discouragement from involving other family members. Daniel hadn't imagined the pattern. He had recognized it before anyone else connected the pieces. David spoke quietly. Your husband may have prevented the same thing from happening to additional families. Tears filled my eyes. Daniel had wanted that more than anything. He never cared about being proven right. He cared about protecting people. That Sunday, our pastor mentioned Daniel during the morning service, not by discussing the investigation. No one outside a small circle knew about it yet. Instead, he spoke about quiet integrity, about people who choose truth even when no one is watching. As I looked around the sanctuary, I realized how many elderly couples sat together in the pews. People who trusted professionals, trusted paperwork, trusted advice, exactly as we had. After the service, an older widow approached me. I heard Daniel always kept wonderful records. He did, she smiled sadly. My husband handled all our finances. I've never understood any of them. For a moment, I saw myself standing in front of her, only weeks earlier, confused, grieving, dependent on others. I gently took her hand. Learn where everything is. She looked surprised. Today. Not someday. Today. She nodded slowly. I think my husband would appreciate that. So would Daniel. That evening, Ethan came over after dinner. He climbed into Daniel's favorite chair and looked around the study. "Grandpa would be happy," I smiled. "Why do you think so?" "Because everybody finally listened." Children often reduce complicated truths into astonishingly simple sentences. Everybody finally listened. That was exactly what had happened. Not because Daniel shouted, not because he accused, because he quietly preserved the truth until it could speak for itself. As I looked at Ethan assembling the unfinished lighthouse puzzle on the coffee table, I realized the greatest part of Daniel's legacy wasn't the money he protected. It wasn't even the evidence he left behind. It was the lesson hidden inside every careful note, every copied document, every recorded conversation. Truth doesn't become stronger because we yell louder. It becomes stronger because we preserve it carefully enough to survive. And thanks to one patient husband, it had. Nearly 3 months passed before life began to resemble something familiar again. The investigation continued quietly. Benjamin updated me only when necessary, carefully following the investigators' requests not to discuss confidential details outside the family. For the first time since Daniel's funeral, our conversations at home were no longer dominated by fear. Instead, they were filled with reflection, questions we wished we had asked sooner, moments we wished we had understood differently. One crisp Saturday afternoon in early autumn, Michael called. "Mom, yes. Could I come by?" "Of course. I'd like to come alone." There was something different in his voice, not urgency, not anxiety, resolve. "I'll be here." An hour later, his truck pulled into the driveway. He stepped out carrying a small wooden box, not a cardboard storage box, not paperwork, a polished oak box about the size of an old photo album. When I opened the front door, neither of us spoke immediately. For a moment, we simply looked at one another. He looked older than he had 3 months earlier. Grief had a way of doing that. "So," I said softly. "So." He held up the wooden box. "I found something while cleaning my office." I invited him inside. We sat at the dining room table, where so many difficult conversations had already taken place. Michael carefully placed the box between us. "I've been avoiding this." "I know. I shouldn't have." He slid the box toward me. "It belonged to Dad." I lifted the lid. Inside were photographs, letters, birthday cards, old Father's Day drawings Ethan had made. At the very bottom rested a folded sheet of notebook paper. Michael recognized it immediately. "I've read it." "You have?" He nodded. I almost threw the whole box away. My heart stopped. "What?" I didn't know what was inside. He swallowed hard. Then I opened it. He took a long breath. "Dad wrote that letter years ago." I unfolded the page. Daniel's handwriting filled both sides. It wasn't part of his investigation. It wasn't about finances. The date in the corner showed it had been written almost 12 years earlier, before Ethan was born, before retirement, before any of this began. The letter was addressed simply, "For my son." I looked at Michael. "Have you finished reading it? 3 times? What did it say to you?" He smiled sadly. "That Dad understood me better than I understood myself." I began reading. "Michael, if you're reading this someday, then you're probably questioning yourself. Life has a way of convincing good people they've failed when they make mistakes. Don't confuse mistakes with character." I felt tears forming immediately. Daniel continued. "I've watched you become a husband, a father, and a hardworking man. You don't always make the right decision. Neither did I. But I've never doubted your heart." I looked up. Michael was already crying. "He still believed in me." "Yes. He always did." Michael covered his eyes with one hand. "I didn't deserve that." I reached across the table. "None of us earn unconditional love. It's given." "That's what makes it unconditional," he nodded slowly. "I keep replaying everything. The office. The papers. Every conversation with Victor. I should have known. Maybe. But you didn't." He stared at the table. "I keep asking myself how I could have been so naive." I answered honestly. "Because you trusted someone your father trusted first." He looked at me. "I never thought about it that way. It's true. Daniel introduced Victor to all of us. You weren't foolish. You were trusting. And there's a difference." Michael sat silently for several moments. Finally, he whispered, "I've wanted to apologize properly." "You already have." "No," I explained. I confessed. "But I never apologized." He stood. Then, to my complete surprise, he walked around the table and knelt beside my chair exactly as he had done when he was a little boy after breaking something valuable. I'm sorry, Mom. His voice shook uncontrollably. I'm sorry I searched Dad's office. I'm sorry I believed someone else instead of asking him directly. I'm sorry I made you carry all this after he died. Tears streamed freely down his face. I can't change any of it. But if I spend the rest of my life earning back your trust, I will. I gently placed both hands on his shoulders. I know. No. I need you to hear all of it. He looked directly into my eyes. I wasn't trying to inherit anything. I wasn't trying to replace Dad. I just thought... His voice broke. I thought I was protecting you. Those words echoed almost perfectly what Daniel had written months earlier. One knows more than the other. Neither understands the whole picture. Daniel had seen the confusion long before Michael himself recognized it. I embraced my son. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Sometimes forgiveness begins long before anyone says the word. Later that afternoon, Rebecca arrived with Ethan. She immediately noticed our red eyes. "Everything all right?" Michael smiled weakly. "We've been talking." Rebecca nodded quietly. "I'll make some tea." While she disappeared into the kitchen, Ethan climbed onto the living room rug carrying the old lighthouse puzzle. Only a handful of pieces remained. "Grandma." "Yes." "I think today we finish it." "So do I." The three of us gathered around the coffee table. Michael sat on one side. I sat opposite him. Ethan knelt between us. Piece by piece, the lighthouse slowly appeared. White walls, blue ocean, gray rocks, bright autumn sky. Suddenly, Ethan stopped. "I remember something." Michael smiled. "What is it, buddy?" "Grandpa told me why he liked lighthouses." I looked at Ethan. "What did he say?" Ethan carefully picked up one of the final pieces. He said, "A lighthouse doesn't stop storms. It helps people find home anyway." The room fell completely silent. I felt my throat tighten. That sounded exactly like Daniel. Simple, quiet, profound. Ethan continued innocently. "He said people think lighthouses are strong because they're tall. But that's not why." "Why then?" Michael asked softly. "Because they keep shining, even when nobody thanks them." Rebecca quietly wiped away tears in the kitchen doorway. Michael looked down at the unfinished puzzle. "Dad was the lighthouse." I nodded. "He was." Ethan smiled proudly. "And now we know how to get home." With that, he placed the final puzzle piece into the center of the lighthouse. Click. The puzzle was complete. No one spoke. No one needed to. The image before us somehow represented everything Daniel had spent his final months trying to accomplish. Not preventing every storm, simply leaving enough light behind for the people he loved to find one another again. That evening, after Rebecca and Ethan left, Michael lingered by the front door. "Mom?" "Yes." "I've been thinking." "About what?" "When all this is finally over, I'd like to volunteer." "Volunteer?" "With organizations that teach seniors about financial scams." He looked almost embarrassed. "I can't undo what happened. But maybe I can stop someone else from making the same mistakes." I smiled. "I think your father would be proud of that." "You really believe so?" "I don't think he ever stopped believing you could become exactly the man you wanted to be." Michael looked toward Daniel's photograph on the hallway table. "I hope someday I deserve that faith." After he left, I stood alone in the quiet house. Months earlier, I had believed Daniel's greatest gift was the flash drive hidden inside my coat pocket. Now I understood differently. The flash drive had revealed the truth. But the greater gift was what that truth eventually restored. Not money, not property, not documents. A family that had nearly been torn apart by deception had finally begun finding its way back to one another. And somehow, even in his absence, Daniel was still leading us home. By the time winter arrived, the house no longer felt haunted by silence. It still missed Daniel. I still reached for him in the middle of the night sometimes, only to remember he was gone. Grief doesn't disappear because justice begins. It simply learns how to live beside hope. The investigation had entered its final stages. Benjamin remained careful about what he shared, but one Friday morning he called with news I had been praying to hear for months. "Scarlett, yes, the financial institutions have completed their reviews." I held my breath. "And they've confirmed Daniel's original records." Relief washed over me so suddenly that I had to sit down. "What does that mean?" "It means every legitimate account balance has been verified. The retirement funds, the investment accounts, the trust, the property records, they all match Daniel's originals." I closed my eyes. Daniel had protected everything. Not just the evidence. Our future, Benjamin continued. Several temporary restrictions are being lifted. You'll regain full control of the accounts over the next few weeks. I smiled through tears. It wasn't about the money. I know. But Daniel wanted you financially secure. He accomplished that. Before ending the call, Benjamin added one more sentence. I have something else for you. What is it? A letter. From Daniel. I've been instructed to give it to you only after the financial reviews were completed. Even after everything, Daniel still had one final surprise waiting. The following Monday, I met Benjamin in his office. He handed me a cream-colored envelope that looked older than the others. Across the front in Daniel's familiar handwriting were the words, "After everything is safe again." Benjamin smiled softly. He was very specific. I imagine he usually was. He certainly was. I carefully opened the envelope. Inside rested 4 handwritten pages. The first line immediately brought tears to my eyes. My dearest Scarlett, if you're reading this letter, then the most difficult part is finally behind you, which means you ignored every temptation to rush. Thank you. I smiled despite myself. Daniel knew me so well. He continued, if our savings have been protected, then remember this. The money was never the victory. Money can be earned again. Trust takes much longer. I paused. Those words settled deep inside me. Daniel went on. Please don't spend the rest of your life measuring people only by their worst decisions. Some people intentionally betray us. Others simply become lost. Learn the difference. Immediately I thought of Michael and Rebecca. Their mistakes had been real, but so had their remorse. The next paragraph made me cry openly. If Michael has admitted the truth, hug him before you lecture him. He punishes himself far more harshly than I ever could. I laughed softly through my tears. Daniel had predicted our conversation almost perfectly. He knew his son even better than I did. Then came another paragraph. If Rebecca tells you she thought she was helping, believe her. She's practical by nature. People who prey on families often look for practical people. They convince them they're solving problems instead of creating them. Again, Daniel had understood everyone. Not only their actions, their hearts. Finally, near the end of the letter, I reached a sentence that took my breath away. Forgiveness is not pretending nothing happened. Forgiveness is refusing to let someone else's deception become your family's permanent inheritance. I read those words 3 more times. Permanent inheritance. Daniel wasn't talking about money. He was talking about bitterness, resentment, broken relationships passed from one generation to the next. He refused to leave that behind. The final paragraph read, there's one last gift waiting, not for solving the mystery, simply because you never stopped choosing kindness before judgment. You already know where to find it. Love always, Daniel. I folded the letter carefully. You knew about this? I asked Benjamin. He smiled. I knew there was another letter. I never knew what it said. As I drove home, Daniel's final sentence echoed in my mind. You already know where to find it. Where the flash drive? The office. The grandfather clock. Then it hit me. The lighthouse puzzle. That evening, I carried the completed puzzle down from the shelf where Ethan and I had placed it after finishing it together. For several minutes, I simply looked at it. Nothing unusual. Then I remembered something Daniel always did when framing puzzles. He wrote the completion date on the back. I carefully removed it from its frame. Behind the cardboard backing rested a second envelope. I laughed aloud. Of course. Only Daniel would hide a gift behind something completed together as a family. Inside wasn't money, not jewelry, not legal documents. Only photographs, dozens of them, pictures spanning 43 years. Our first apartment, Michael's first bicycle, family camping trips, Christmas mornings, Ethan's first day of kindergarten. On the very bottom rested one final photograph. Daniel had taken it himself, using the timer. All 5 of us stood in front of the lighthouse we'd visited during our anniversary trip to Maine. Someone had written beneath it, not in Daniel's handwriting, in Ethan's clumsy childhood printing, "Family always finds home," I remembered. Daniel had helped Ethan write those words after the trip. At the time, it seemed like an ordinary vacation memory. Now, it felt like a promise fulfilled. A week later, several financial institutions officially restored every account affected by the investigation. Benjamin met with me one final time to review the paperwork. As we finished signing the last documents, he closed the folder and smiled. Daniel would approve. Why, you read everything before signing. I laughed. I learned my lesson. So did all of us. Before I left, Benjamin handed me another folder. What's this, recommendations? For what? Daniel requested that once everything was settled, a portion of his charitable fund continue supporting organizations that educate seniors about financial exploitation. I stared at him. He planned that, too. Benjamin nodded. He believed prevention mattered more than punishment. That sounded exactly like Daniel, always thinking beyond himself, beyond our family, beyond one investigation. That weekend, Michael and Rebecca came over for dinner with Ethan. For the first time in months, no one discussed investigators, or evidence, or financial records. Instead, we laughed about old stories. Rebecca admitted she still couldn't bake Daniel's favorite cornbread correctly. Michael confessed he had inherited Daniel's terrible singing voice. Ethan proudly announced he'd beaten everyone in chess at school. Halfway through dessert, Ethan looked around the table. "It feels different." "What does?" I asked. "We're smiling again." Rebecca quietly reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "I'm grateful you gave us the chance." I looked at all three of them. "It wasn't my decision." "What do you mean?" I smiled. "It was Daniel's." They looked puzzled. I stood and retrieved the final letter from the hallway drawer. Without reading it aloud, I summarized its most important lesson. He believed that if we allowed one dishonest person to destroy our family forever, then that person would have taken far more than money. Silence settled around the table. Michael nodded slowly. "I understand now." "So do I." Outside, snow began falling softly across the backyard. Inside, laughter gradually returned to a house that had once seemed filled only with grief. Justice had recovered our finances, but compassion had recovered something far more valuable: our family. 1 year after Daniel's funeral, our family gathered in the same backyard where he and I had spent countless summer evenings watching Ethan chase fireflies. The maple tree had grown another few inches. The porch swing Daniel built 20 years earlier still creaked gently in the afternoon breeze. Some things had changed forever. Others thankfully remained exactly the same. Michael had insisted on organizing the day. No speeches, he had warned everyone. Dad would have hated anything too formal. Rebecca smiled. He would have escaped to the grill halfway through. She was right. Daniel never enjoyed being the center of attention. He preferred quiet conversations on the porch over grand celebrations. Even now we honored him the way he would have wanted. Simple food, family, laughter, stories. Benjamin arrived carrying a small gift bag. He had become more than our attorney during the past year. He had become a trusted friend. As we sat around the picnic table, Ethan ran across the yard carrying a model airplane Daniel had helped him build years earlier. "Grandma, look." He launched it into the air. The little plane glided gracefully across the yard before landing gently in the grass. "Grandpa said it flies better if you don't throw it too hard." Michael smiled. "That sounds like Dad." He always believed forcing things usually made them worse. I couldn't help laughing. Even Daniel's advice about toy airplanes somehow applied to life. Lunch stretched into the afternoon. We shared memories that no longer brought only tears. Rebecca remembered the first Thanksgiving after she married Michael, when Daniel secretly rescued the turkey she'd accidentally overcooked without telling anyone. Michael laughed about learning to drive in Daniel's old pickup truck. "I stalled it 6 times. "You stalled it 8, I corrected. He groaned. "You always remember everything." "I lived through it." Even Ethan contributed. "My favorite memory is when Grandpa let me beat him at checkers." Michael grinned. "He let you—" Ethan frowned. "What do you mean?" We all burst into laughter. Daniel had never admitted he intentionally lost those games. Some secrets deserve to remain beautiful. As the afternoon sun drifted lower, Benjamin quietly walked over to me. "I've been waiting for the right moment." He handed me a small envelope. I looked at him curiously. "Another one." He smiled. "The last. I promise." Across the front, Daniel had written only 2 words: "Anniversary Day." I laughed softly. "He really planned everything." Benjamin nodded. "He certainly tried." I opened the envelope. Inside was a tiny memory card. Not another flash drive, just a simple SD card. A handwritten note rested beside it. One final message: "Watch together." I looked toward my family. They were all here, exactly as Daniel had hoped. I carried my laptop onto the back porch. Everyone gathered around. Even Ethan climbed into my lap. I inserted the memory card. Only one file appeared. For my family, I clicked play. Daniel appeared sitting on the porch swing, the very same porch swing where we now sat. He looked directly into the camera and smiled. "Well, if you're all watching this together..." Then Scarlett ignored my terrible habit of hiding things. Everyone laughed. Even hearing his voice still brought tears to my eyes. Daniel continued, "Good, because this message was never meant for one person. It was always meant for all of you." He looked toward the backyard almost exactly as it appeared now. "If everything worked, then you're together. I hoped you would be." He smiled warmly. "Michael," our son instinctively leaned closer to the screen, "I've always been proud of you. Not because you've been perfect. You haven't," Michael laughed through his tears, "but because every time life knocked you down, you eventually stood back up. Keep doing that." Then Daniel looked directly into the camera again. "Rebecca." She covered her mouth with both hands. "You've always wanted to solve problems. Never lose that. Just remember that the loudest expert isn't always the wisest one." Rebecca nodded silently as tears rolled down her face. Daniel smiled again. "Ethan," our grandson sat perfectly still, "if you're old enough to understand this, then I hope you're still asking questions." "The world always needs people willing to ask one more," Ethan whispered. "I am Grandpa." Finally, Daniel looked directly at me. "Scarlett," his smile softened. "Thank you. For every ordinary day, for every difficult one, for believing in me, and for believing in everyone else long enough to discover the truth." My vision blurred completely. Daniel paused for several seconds. Then he spoke the words I would carry for the rest of my life. "The greatest inheritance I could ever leave isn't this house. It isn't our savings. It isn't the evidence. It's the hope that when life tests this family, love will still make the final decision." Silence filled the porch. No one moved. Daniel looked toward the camera one final time. "If you've reached this moment, please stop looking backward. You've already learned what the past came to teach. Now, go build something worth remembering." He smiled. "I'll be cheering for you." The screen slowly faded to black. No dramatic ending, no music. Only Daniel's empty porch swing gently moving in the breeze. Exactly as it had so many evenings while he sat there thinking. For several minutes, no one spoke. Then Ethan quietly climbed down from my lap. He walked over to the real porch swing, touched it gently, and gave it the smallest push. It rocked back and forth, almost as though someone invisible still occupied it. "Grandpa would have liked today." He said it so naturally, so confidently, no one disagreed. That evening, after everyone had gone home, I remained on the porch watching the sunset. The flash drive rested in my hand. The tiny device that Ethan had slipped into my coat pocket 1 year earlier, such a small object. Yet it had carried enough truth to save our family from tearing itself apart. Daniel hadn't left it to expose Michael. He hadn't left it to punish Rebecca. He hadn't even left it to defeat Victor. He left it because he understood something I hadn't fully appreciated until now. Truth is most powerful when it's used to heal rather than destroy. Victor eventually faced the consequences of his own choices through the legal process. Other families came forward, financial safeguards improved. Organizations helping seniors used Daniel's documentation to teach others how to recognize manipulation before it was too late. His careful records protected people he would never meet. I think he would have liked that most of all. As for our family, healing wasn't immediate. Trust wasn't magically restored. Those things took months. Conversations, honesty, patience, sometimes tears, sometimes laughter. But little by little we rebuilt something stronger than what deception had nearly destroyed. Michael now volunteers with community programs teaching older adults how to recognize financial exploitation. Rebecca helps organize educational workshops for caregivers and families facing major medical decisions. Benjamin continues advising families with the same quiet integrity Daniel admired. And Ethan? He still asks one more question than everyone else, just like his grandfather hoped. When I finally stood to go inside, I paused beside the porch swing. The evening breeze stirred gently through the maple leaves overhead. "Good night, Daniel," I whispered. For the first time since losing him, the silence no longer felt empty. It felt peaceful, because love had outlasted deception. Truth had outlasted fear, and one quiet man, armed with nothing more than patience, integrity, and a tiny flash drive, had left behind the greatest legacy anyone could hope for. Not wealth, not revenge, but a family that found its way home. Looking back now, I understand that the most dangerous betrayals rarely begin with obvious villains. They begin with small compromises, misplaced trust, and the comforting belief that someone else will always take care of the difficult decisions for us. Daniel never asked me to become suspicious of everyone. Instead, he taught me to value truth enough to protect it, patience enough to understand it, and compassion enough to keep it from destroying the people I loved. His careful preparation didn't just preserve financial records. It preserved our ability to forgive wisely, to rebuild honestly, and to remember that justice without mercy can still leave a family broken. If this journey has taught me anything, it's that love is strongest when it's supported by honesty, and trust is most meaningful when it is earned every day. I hope our story reminds you to have the important conversations today to understand the responsibilities shared within your family, and to never assume that asking careful questions means you love someone any less. Sometimes asking one more question is exactly how we protect the people who matter most. If this story touched your heart, I'd truly love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever experienced a moment when the truth changed everything you believed about someone you loved? Share your story in the comments below. And if you enjoy heartfelt family dramas filled with emotional twists, meaningful lessons, and hopeful endings, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support allows us to continue sharing stories that remind us all of the power of truth, forgiveness, and family.